to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Simon, and I've been investing in property for over 20 years. And if you're an active landlord or planning your next property investment, this podcast is for you. You're listening to this on the 1st of the month, specifically the 1st of October 2025, which means that when I recorded it, it was still September. Unfortunately, this means that some of the monthly graphs I look at don't include the last few days of September data. I do always like to include all of the data right up to the end of the month that we're talking about, but in this case, it's not quite there. They are, of course, complete up to and including last week, so it is only a few days of September data that we're missing, but I do just want to say that unfortunately that is the case. I don't think it'll make too big a difference to the numbers that we're looking at, however. And before I do dig into those property market statistics and data that's available from PATMA, I thought I'd take a quick look at some figures that were recently published by the ONS, that's the Office for National Statistics. This ONS report was released a couple of weeks ago in September and is looking at data up to and including August, although in some cases it's July or maybe even June for certain areas of the country and for sales rather than rental. But anyway, they're trying to be up to August, so not quite as up to date, but close. The report is titled Private Rent and House Prices, UK September 2025. Of course, as I mentioned, only actually goes up to August or maybe even a few months before that. But as you can see from the summary at the top, it's really looking at two indexes. And that's the price index of private rents, which measures private rent inflation across new and existing tenancies, and the UK House Price Index, which measures house price inflation. Now, the bits that I'm particularly going to pick out of this report are really the ones on the rental side. And initially, in their main points, there were two that I wanted to pick out particularly. And that's that average rents increased by 5.8% in England. And this was in the 12 months to August 2025. And also that the average house prices increased 2.7% again in England over the last 12 months. Now in this case, they're looking to June because they've got a slightly earlier data cutoff for house prices. I'm picking just the England figures here because that's the data that I normally look at in PATMA. These two ONS numbers for rent and price both show quite a bit more growth than I see when looking at just the asking prices for rent and for sale. For rents, this could be explained by changes in existing tenancies trying to perhaps catch up a bit, which wouldn't show in asking rent data. But for sales prices, I wonder, perhaps, hopefully, if this is an indication that achieved sale prices managed to increase more and close the gap a little with the asking prices, which, not to give things away too early, are not looking quite so rosy. Next up, I'm going to pause briefly on some of the graphs as we scroll down this report. And specifically, I wanted to look at these ones just briefly. And again, mainly noting the English one, but these are showing the cost of average rents over the last 10 years. But I'm fairly quickly going to scroll on a bit more to the next set of graphs, which show the same information, but as an annual percentage change. Again, looking at England, you can see that rents were increasing at over 8% per year for quite a while. The rate of increase is now dropping back a bit, but it's still quite high compared to 5 to 10 years ago when it was really an awful lot lower. Of course, these can't be interpreted entirely on their own, as inflation, and especially house price inflation, affects how changing rent actually feels especially from a point of view of investment. The last thing I want to show in this report is a map-based representation of the annual rent change across the country. you can step back on this graph sort of month by month, as I'm showing if you're watching the video. But the point is, it allows you to see which areas performed better or worse in the year up to each of these months. I think perhaps this could help provide an idea of areas of investment interest where rents have been performing a bit better. Though, of course, historic performance is no real indication of future performance, but maybe it might give you a bit of an idea. Now, swapping to look at PATMA property market data, we can see that the number of new listings had a little peak at the start of September, but have already fallen back quite a bit. Now comparable to some of the summer weeks, there are still plenty of new listings coming to market, but the post-summer rush was fairly short, and perhaps somewhat shorter than we may have been hoping. Looking at new listing prices, they're up across the board in September. There's obviously more optimism from sellers and agents in the prices they're bringing to market. Looking back at September 2024, there's a very similar spike in optimism. In fact, the average 3-bed asking price last year was £345,942. But the September optimism this year only managed to push up to a new listing average of £344,427, which is about £1,500 or 0.5% down over the year. So, unfortunately, this sharp upward slope in the graph isn't looking quite as optimistic. For another dose of pessimism, I'm afraid, we can look at the number of listings seeing a price change. More specifically, that 21% of listings got a price reduction in September. Not only is that the highest rate for a few months, it's also higher than the rate of reductions last September, which was only 20%. And I'm afraid the news doesn't get any better when we look at the time to sell data. We're running at an average of 74 days of listing time before properties sold this September. That's up from August, which is seasonally normal, but it's also up quite significantly from September 2024, which was only 67 days. The number of property sales do seem to be holding fairly steady, at least, if just at a lower level than we might hope. Looking at fall-throughs, we also see fairly steady numbers, but these are running higher than might be hoped. So overall, it's not looking to be that great, and it certainly doesn't seem to be a building market based on sort of the foundations that Simon Glastonbury and I talked about a few episodes ago that we thought might be in place for the end of the summer period and heading into September and October. Of course, a small silver lining to all of this, if you're looking to invest at the moment, is that we're definitely in a buyer's market, and it looks like it will probably persist for a little while yet. So now could be a great time to be out hunting for deals, perhaps trying to pick up some of those fall-through opportunities. As always, I'm just going to finish with a quick look at the rental market. I mentioned earlier that we're not seeing the same results as the ONS, and that might be because we're only considering new rental listings. With that in mind, our September shows the 3-bed average going up just a little. But everything else, that's 1-bed, 2-bed, and 4+ beds, all fell slightly in their average asking prices, or asking rents, I should say. This is roughly in line with the seasonal norm and what we can see last year, but moving it a bit earlier. In September 2024, only 1-bed asking rents fell, but then asking rents fell more dramatically across the board in October 2024. So the big question is whether rents have further to fall this October, or whether the change was just a bit earlier this year. Of course, you can sign up to free weekly property market data emails from PATMA There's a link in the show notes, and you will then be the first to know the answer. If you want more localized property market data, please do take a look at PATMA's Deal Finder Pro product as well. And thank you very much for listening. I hope you found the property market data useful today, and I look forward to talking to you again next time.